All right, welcome back. I'm giving my impressions on all the nonfiction books I have read throughout my life so far. Hopefully, you can find something here to add to your own reading list. For context, I am 25 and I'd say I started reading properly about 5 years ago. We have 50 titles total to talk about, and the list is sorted alphabetically by title. This list includes only the books I have read from start to back. So, let's get going. Number 1, 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson. Starting off strong. I dislike self-help books. If we count this as a self-help book, which it really isn't, it is the best of them and it will kick your butt. If you're arrogant enough to call the material in here obvious, I think you're missing the bigger picture. Peterson's biggest strength lies in verbalizing and arguing highly abstract concepts in layman's terms and extract very bare meaning of ideas and how they might be applicable to your everyday life. I don't think he's concerned with the self-aggrandizing game so-called intellectuals play. Number 2, 12 More Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson. Obviously, a sequel is usually never better than the original. This is the case for Beyond Order. However, it takes on a bit of a different prism than the first and still packs a punch. Number 3, Antichrist by Friedrich Nietzsche. Probably the work of Nietzsche that I most comprehended, and it hit me to the core. Funny thing is, I was preparing to get married at the time and was enrolled in a pre-kana, I think it's called in English, basically a seminar that you must finish if you want to get married in a church while reading this book. What a perfect harmony of opposites. You will hardly find a better critique of Christianity than this, although if you're even remotely religious, go into this book at your own risk. Number 4, Anxiety by Fritz Riemann. It is one of those pop psychology books which try to categorize a phenomenon in very abstract and broad terms. I remember the author also using some sort of astrology as a comparison, which ticked me off. However, like in most of these books, the intention is good and what's hidden in all the fluff is genuinely important information. Number 5, Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious by Carl Jung. This was my first entry to Jung. Complicated enough as he is, the version I read was a confusing and weak translation to Lithuanian, so suffice to say, I had a horrible time and do not remember any of it, except I found out that there is something called the unconscious and archetypes. I forced myself to read it and I stopped doing so since. However, from time to time, I would stumble upon a sentence or two kind of grasped, and the profoundness of them kept me going. I found that to be the case with reading material that is above your comprehension level in general. Number 6, The Art of Loving by Erich Fromm. Love is work, and it is hard work at that. Who could have thought? On the surface, it might seem like a cliche-ridden work, but really it was transformative for me in the way I understand romantic relationships. Love and loving comes naturally to some people, but for idiots like me, I need someone smart to explain it for me. I highly recommend this one. It is short and sweet. Just pick it up if you ever come across it. You will not regret it. Number 7, The Art of the Novel by Milan Kundera. I get that some find Kundera to be arrogant and snobbish, which he is, but I also found him charming and passionate. He's extremely passionate about writing and art in general. While I wouldn't say this book is practical, it is still a great read for anyone interested in novels and or writing them. The way Kundera pays attention to the smallest of details and goes on about how he understands words or concepts was fascinating and inspired me to be more particular. Number 8, Becoming Myself by Yalom, or Yalom, I'm not sure. It is Yalom's autobiography. Yalom is one of the modern giants of psychology, most notably innovating in the field of group therapy. And as a psychology student, I thoroughly enjoyed it. Although an interesting feeling of despair overcame me when it hit me that all his experiences will vanish with him, even though he accomplished so much in his life. I think this contrast is what provoked the despairing thoughts. Number 9, Beyond Good and Evil by Friedrich Nietzsche. Everything I read seemed to shine with meaning and I was enamored with every word. However, it did not form a unity and I did not conjure up a whole picture of what he was getting at. Just sentence after sentence of depth, but I could not connect them together. obviously mostly because I dove in blindly without any philosophical background or guide, and this was also my first book by Nietzsche. Oh, yeah, and if that wasn't enough, as English is not my first language, this was really pushing and exceeding my comprehension limits. I remember at the very end when he got rambling about Germany and that composer, Wagner, I think, I got very tired of him. Number 10, Burnout Society by Byung-Chul Han. I'm sorry about that pronunciation. Well, speaking of Nietzsche, how so much information can be compacted into so few words is still astounding to me. A friend passed this book on to everyone in my circle, and the material for discussion that it provided was plentiful to keep us going for a few weeks. I especially remember the vita contemplativa concept, which opened something in my worldview. Basically, it says that the highest level of human culture is to be an observing and contemplating species, whereas in our society, we're more like animals in the jungle, constantly reacting to stimuli. Number 11, The Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx. Got it for free when ordering a book. It's a waste of paper. Number 12, A Confession by Leo Tolstoy. I love getting a glimpse into great authors or thinkers' inner worlds. Apparently, Tolstoy wrestled with despair his whole life, and his writing ability combined with his rational thinking delivers a fascinating and fascinatingly short nonfiction work from a legendary fiction writer. His discovery of combining physical work to balance out his mental one is also something I have implemented in my life. Oh, and his admiration for the peasants is something I encounter in many true intellectuals. Number 13, The Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank. Read it during my stay in the Netherlands and after having visited the Anne Frank Museum, a tragic yet monumental book that will go down in history and deservedly so. Number 14, The Doctor and the Soul by Viktor Frankl. If I remember right, this book is aimed more at psychologists, but it is easily accessible to anyone and does not use many technical terms. It is a very useful book focusing on Frankl's logotherapy foundations and the importance of this uniquely human phenomenon of meaning. This book gave me the strength and knowledge to overcome anxiety problems I was having at the time. Also, research paradoxical intention. Basically, the idea is to imagine what you are afraid of and blow it out of proportion. Let's say one fears crying in public and has intrusive, anxious thoughts about it. By this method, you would have to seriously imagine that, you know what, I will not only cry in public, but I will bawl my eyes out and cry so hard as to be nominated the king of wimps and so on and so on. The more ridiculous, the better. According to Frankl, once the patient seriously went into this exercise and managed to laugh at themselves, the intrusive thoughts would diminish. Tried it, works like a charm. Number 15, The Doors of Perception by Aldous Huxley. I don't know. I have no trouble with magic mushrooms or LSD by themselves, but the movement behind it, I distrust. However, Huxley's ability to put a psychedelic trip into words is surprisingly accurate, which is why this book holds such a reputation. But honestly, I remember it got a bit boring while reading it, but I enjoyed his high openness to experience nonetheless. Number 16, Ecce Homo by Friedrich Nietzsche, or Ecce, I'm not sure. This is Nietzsche's autobiography, kind of. Friedrich managed to reach that point where he is so arrogant that it is actually enjoyable. Number 17, Escape from Freedom by Erich Fromm. For some reason, I do not remember much from this book. I think everything Fromm wrote I was kind of familiar with anyway, so perhaps it did not leave a big impact. In general, my experience with Fromm's writing is that he verbalizes, rationalizes, and simplifies abstract concepts. However, it is often hit or miss with how much it actually has to do with real life. Number 18, Essays and Aphorisms by Arthur Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer is a sobering philosopher who cuts straight to the point and disregards all the intellectual fluff that many philosophers indulge in. Also, this work is quite comprehensible without any background or prior research. It would be one of my recommendations for anyone getting into philosophy. Number 19, The Five Love Languages by Gary Chapman. A very pop psychology book. Read it more as a joke, but it wasn't that bad. Chapman sums up his counseling experience and distills it into 5 languages. I'm not a fan of the theory or that everyone has a love language akin to a personality trait, but by itself, the book is a practical tool for relationship maintenance and expressing your love to your partner. Number 20, Four Archetypes by Carl Jung. Jung believed that every person partakes of a collective unconscious that persists through generations. The unconscious is made up of archetypes which echo throughout human history. I found this book the best so far out of all I have read of Jung. It would not be Jung if it was easy to read, and it is frankly a bit dated. However, his writings on the mother complex and especially the rebirth archetype influenced my thinking tremendously. Number 21, Games People Play by Eric Berne. One of my starters into psychological books before I went to study it. An easily comprehensible and useful book that can serve as a tool to gain insight into your relationships. Also, one can use this book to grasp how to make those friendly but superficial connections with people, like distant colleagues or a local barista. Number 22, The Geography of Bliss by Eric Weiner. Weiner went around the countries that are highest on the happiness index to try and figure out what makes them happy. I do not remember what he found, probably that everyone has a different way to experience happiness, we're all unique, blah, 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 but it was a good read at 17 and inspired me to travel the world. Number 23, The Gulag Archipelago by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Jesus, where to begin with this one? What's above must read. A human breathes unconditionally. It is part of our nature. Well, reading Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago should be an unconditional part of our nature. I will make a separate video on this monumental work, but for now, let me ramble on it a bit longer. Solzhenitsyn thoroughly describes the back end of the Soviet Union and the immense corruption, inhumanity, and exploitation of unrivaled extent that the Gulag network stood for. Peterson said that reading this feels like someone screaming out of despair and fury with every word, sentence, and paragraph. I agree completely. Solzhenitsyn was a genius, and he is relentless in this more than 1,000-page masterwork. You can also find a good abbreviated version that Solzhenitsyn himself approved. Please, do yourself and humanity a favor. Read this. It will not be nice, it will not be pleasant, but it will be reality at its bottom. Number 24, Introduction to Psychoanalysis by Sigmund Freud. Freud explains what we call now a Freudian slip, then dream interpretation, and finally neurosis in a very simplistic way. A dry read, but if you are interested in psychology, it is worth your time. This one can act both as a historical book to grasp how much this field has changed and an actual theoretical work. Number 25, Jung's Map of the Soul by Murray Stein. This is a proper entry into the Jungian world. Stein does a fantastic job on the impossible task of simplifying and laying out Jung's theory. This is a perfect introduction to anyone new to Jung or a tool to overview and categorize the various complex concepts for intermediates. Number 26, The Last Days of Socrates by Plato. Socrates must have been an annoying person to be around. I am not big on the Greeks, so I do not have much to say about this one. I just widen my horizons a bit by at least introducing myself to Plato's writing, and you can do the same if you're interested. Number 27, Letter to His Father by Franz Kafka. You go, Kafka. Relatable, archetypal, father-son dynamic put eloquently into words. Also works as an insight into Franz Kafka, the person. Number 28, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Frankl found meaning even in a concentration camp and wrote down his experiences and observations as a psychologist, later turning it into logotherapy. One of those books you just cannot say much about. It stands as plain as day as a testament to our world's shadow without anything to add or take away. Number 29, Maps of Meaning by Jordan Peterson. I read this along with watching Peterson's university lectures, and suffice to say, it was an enlightening January. If you only know Peterson from 12 Rules for Life or YouTube Shorts, I'd recommend reading this. While it lacks editing and is sometimes repetitive, it is nevertheless profound and changed forever the way I understand our being. Number 30, Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. My first introduction to Stoicism. Well, honestly, the philosophical side of it all seemed like shallow rambling disconnected from reality. However, reading the thoughts and notes of an emperor was a memorable experience. Number 31, Meeting the Shadow by Connie Zweig and Jeremiah Abrams. This one disintegrated many psychological defenses I had built up and made me see scapegoating and other ways of projecting the shadow in a different light. It was not a pleasant read, but definitely enlightening if you dare to truly reflect on yourself. Also, a good entry into the Jungian world. Number 32, The Myth of Sisyphus by Albert Camus. A philosophical book by Camus which nevertheless challenged the foundation of my understanding and threw me off balance for a good couple of months. While I think I have moved on from this worldview of the absurd, it was still influential to say the least. Number 33, A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle. I walked around as calm as a tree while reading this. I have no idea how books have these sorts of effects on me, but I am not joking. My friends even noticed that something is different about me. However, the effect vanished soon after I finished it. Toll himself does not give me a good feeling like any other guru, but I found these kinds of ideas help balance out the sometimes one-sidedness of efficient modern culture. Also, I liked his viewpoint that psychotherapy at some point becomes simply intellectual masturbation. Number 34, Notebooks Volume 3 by Albert Camus. I grabbed this book randomly in a bookstore because it was on sale. Wouldn't say it's worth reading unless you are really interested in Camus or his personality, although it was intriguing psychologically to peer a tiny bit into his inner world. Number 35, On the Nature of the Psyche by Carl Jung. Jung compares the psyche to energy and uses concepts from physics to explain its nature. While I don't get the science and physics, it intuitively seems right somehow. Number 36, Ordinary Men by Christopher Browning. World War II and the Holocaust are topics that I have been slowly digging in for many years, and this is the latest book I have read regarding the topic. It is not a pleasant read, and I was visibly depressed to my wife throughout the whole time I spent digesting it. Browning provides so many statistics and numbers, it is nauseating to try to grasp the brutal, cold, and calculation of it all. It felt like reading a logistics report of a company. Disturbing. That was the part that stuck to me more than reading about ordinary men doing extraordinary evil things. I think mostly because I have disregarded the naive notion that evil is somewhere out there in monsters or anti-humans. However, if you still carry this idea, this book is for you. Also, this book depicts how the everydayness of the Holocaust unfolded and looked for the usual people participating in it, on both sides. The true horror is how mundane it all was. Number 37, Our Inner Conflicts by Karen Horney. In the world of psychoanalysis, Horney's work is fresh air. I found her to be more balanced, especially to Freud. She famously expanded on the societal impact on personality and neurosis, which supplemented and balanced out the prevailing Freud's view tremendously. Although the book itself does what seemingly every book like this does, categorize a phenomenon into broad and simple categories. However, I found she stayed honest with her intentions and limitations and distilled her clinical experience into a theory. Number 38, Peace of Mind by Seneca. Same as with Aurelius, disconnected and shallow, coming off as empty moral lecturing rather than anything that has to do with reality. I guess it's just my experience with Stoicism. Number 39, Psychology and Religion by Carl Jung. Jung's life's work can be seen as an attempt to bridge faith with science, the spiritual with the empirical. I think his theory is a monument to that goal, but good luck comprehending his writings. Number 40, The Psychology of the Child by Jean Piaget. While it is a snooze fest of a read, what's packed in here from a psychological perspective is rock solid. Piaget forever dismantled horoscopes and superstitions for me with this book, and I was never the same since. Knocks on wood. Number 41, Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. Make your money work for you, kids. Passive income is the best income. My dad gave me this book when I was turning 18. Well, reading this is better than reading nothing about finance. It gave me a decent foundation to build on in my financial literacy. Number 42, Road to Wigan Pier by George Orwell. Orwell was a journalist, apparently. Before this book, I was ignorant of what the Industrial Revolution capitalism looked like, and Orwell depicts it thoroughly by visiting poor English industrial towns and writing about it. While not a gripping read, it is nevertheless important history. Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari. I am sorry about that pronunciation. That there were other human species blew my mind. Also, that wherever humans went, large predators went extinct. Sounds obvious, but you never think about it in that way. Though I remember hating Harari's quote unquote philosophizing parts, like when he compares the power of a modern president wearing a suit gives off versus the peacock like attires of old royalty, and how apparently, if I remember right, the latter signals more power, which I disagree with completely. Well, at least that is the impression that it left me. Scripts People Live by Claude Steiner. I found it incredibly weak and annoying compared to Burney. Steiner constantly beats around the bush, fills the book with unnecessary chapters, seemingly to just pad the page count. Also, I hate it when nonfiction authors find it their place to move away from the topic of the book and go on philosophizing and moralizing their worldview on something. Steiner's guilty of this sin here. My recommendation is to skip this one. Number 45, Sickness Unto Death by Soren Kierkegaard. I felt so sophisticated reading this in a cafe, you have no idea. How much did I understand of it? I decline to answer. Obviously, a complicated read, testing my limits of English, but I found this one to be much more comprehensible than Nietzsche, for example. I always found Kierkegaard to be quite balanced psychologically, at least for a philosopher, and this book gives off the same effect. It is not earth-shattering, rather it opened my eyes in terms of despair and everyone's experience of it, but left me in balance as a human being. Number 46, Story by Robert McKee. McKee's experience, wisdom, and straightforward, no-nonsense writing style makes this book worth its weight in gold. Every page of this is filled with knowledge, and I found myself engulfed in the screenwriting space. This is the book if you're interested in screenplays. Number 47, Through the Language Glass by Guy Deutscher. A book about the impact language might have on our comprehension of the world. It is a fine read if you're into that kind of thing, but I did not find it exciting or memorable. Number 48, Thus Spake Zarathustra by Friedrich Nietzsche. One of a kind. Obviously a tough read, but I think I got out of this one more than Beyond Good and Evil. If you only read an excerpt, read the chapter where they start to worship the donkey. Number 49, To Have or To Be by Erich Fromm. It is always fascinating how a short book about a narrow subject can change your life in some way. Fromm, in one part of this book, talks about the need to write thoughts down and how it is a form of ownership, yet we should not try to own thoughts and so on. Never wrote down a single personal thought since. In reality, Fromm did not show me anything inherently new, but convinced me of something I was already feeling intuitively. Personally, I don't like journaling, keeping a diary, taking notes in class, and so on. It's just that I can point to this as a clear verbalization of my intuition. Alright, lastly, number 50, Twilight of the Idols by Friedrich Nietzsche. Last one on the list, and it is an entry that is a bit underwhelming. Frankly, I do not remember anything from this one and only recall not enjoying it at all. Although this is the book where the famous philosophize with a hammer comes from. Fun fact, apparently Nietzsche did not mean that you should go around destroying every idea, but rather as a metaphor. Imagine that idols are like metal sculptures that are hollow on the inside. The philosopher's job is to take a hammer, tap on the sculpture, and listen to the sound it makes inside. Listen to the resonance. And with this beautiful metaphor, that concludes the list of all the nonfiction books I have read from start to back in my life so far. Hope you enjoyed it. See you soon.